At 05:25 hours local time, on the 19th of July 2026, a Ukrainian Mura V5 unmanned surface vessel quietly left the waters off Odessa and entered the Black Sea. Its target was Kerch Port, where a Project 10410 Svetlac-class patrol boat was conducting interception duty against Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles attacking Russia's Shadow Fleet. But before the Mura V5 could reach its target, it had to survive a threat that appeared even earlier than Russia's defenses, from Ukraine's own coastline. After passing the final check off Odessa, the vessel accelerated into open water. Immediately, a Ukrainian machine gun positioned 700 feet along the shoreline swung its barrel toward the thermal signature that had just appeared on the surface. Inside a secret control center near Odessa, the operating crew immediately cut the acceleration command. The engine dropped to minimum power, allowing the Mura V5 to drift on inertia and avoid making any movement that could cause the gunner to mistake it for a Russian attack boat. Above, 7 FP-1 unmanned aerial vehicles heading toward Crimea were transmitting encrypted identification signals. Below, the Ukrainian gunner raised his night vision sight and searched for the only thing that could stop him from pulling the trigger. 5 seconds. 7 seconds. Then he saw it, an encrypted signal emitted from the body of the Mura V5, repeating in a sequence that only Ukrainian units had been briefed on in advance. For a few short moments, everything seemed to freeze. The gunner kept the target in his sight while the vessel continued drifting through the dark water. Even one small mistake at this moment would have been enough to end the mission before it had truly begun. Fortunately, the soldier remembered the mission handover briefing before his watch. He lowered the barrel and the control center immediately restored engine power. The Mura V5 had just survived its first threat. And the worrying part is that situations like this happen far more often than you might think. If you look at the Mura V5 itself, you will understand why it could be mistaken for a Russian attack boat in the darkness. The vehicle is 17 feet long, weighs nearly a ton, and has a composite hull with a smooth hydrodynamic profile designed to skim rapidly across rough seas while maintaining a low signature. When moving, the hull rises only 20 in above the water. Its extremely small radar cross-section combined with its low and narrow shape allows the Mura V5 to almost blend into the waves of the Black Sea. On a radar screen, it may appear only as a small clutter return. Its propulsion system can push the vessel to 70 nautical miles per hour, fast enough to close the distance to a target before Russian patrol boats have time to adjust their interception formation. With an operating range of up to 480 nautical miles, the Mura V5 can leave the Odessa area, cross most of the Black Sea, and approach targets deep inside Kerch Port. Inside the hull is 700 pounds of explosive material. That amount of explosive is large enough to cause serious damage to a patrol vessel or paralyze a coastal logistics facility if the vessel reaches the correct point. However, the most dangerous part of the Mura V5 is not only its speed or its warhead. Its control system combines global navigation satellite system positioning, inertial navigation equipment, and a first-person view camera transmitting live images back to the command center. When the satellite signal is stable, the operating crew can control the vessel from hundreds of miles away. If the enemy begins jamming, the inertial system still helps it maintain its direction of travel, while the interference-resistant video link allows the operator to keep identifying the target during the final seconds. That means Russian forces are not only facing a remotely controlled boat, they are facing a low, fast, and difficult-to-detect strike platform that can cross hundreds of miles of the Black Sea and continue moving toward its target even when the electronic environment around it begins to collapse. That is why electro-optical identification became vital. In the darkness off Odessa, a Ukrainian gunner could only see a low, small target almost blending into the sea surface. He had only 5 seconds to determine whether it was a Ukrainian Mura V5 or a Russian boat trying to approach the coastline. If he identified it correctly, he would hold fire and allow the mission against Kerch Port to proceed. But one error would mean ending the operation at the coast. To prevent that from happening, coastal units were given an encrypted information package before the mission began. It specified the corridor that friendly vehicles would use, the expected time window, and the signal sequence that had to appear on the observation system. Mounted on the body of the Mura V5 was a small electro-optical station. This cylindrical or box-shaped equipment cluster rose above the deck of the vessel, containing day and night cameras, infrared equipment, and thermal sensors. It allowed the operating crew to observe the sea surface, transmit live images back to the command center, and at the same time emit the encrypted identification signal. This signal did not require searchlights and did not force coastal units to break radio silence. The gunner only had to check the electro-optical screen, compare the received code sequence, and confirm that the target in front of him was inside the assigned corridor. But the encrypted signal alone was still not enough. The movement of the vessel was the final confirmation step. If it had been a Russian boat at this distance, it would most likely have accelerated and pointed directly toward the shore, trying to break through the defensive line. But the Mura V5s were pointing their V-shaped bows toward the Black Sea, shutting down their engines and drifting on inertia exactly as planned in advance. 3 conditions had to match completely: the correct corridor, the correct encrypted signal, and the correct movement behavior. Only after all 3 checks were confirmed did the Ukrainian gunner lower his weapon and allow the Mura V5 to continue its journey toward Kerch Port. But as the vessel accelerated into open water, a far more complex Russian defensive network was already preparing to react. After passing the final checkpoint off Odessa, the Mura V5 restored full power and accelerated to 60 miles per hour, pushing the vessel deep into the central Black Sea on its journey toward the Kerch Strait. The 7 FP-1 unmanned aerial vehicles also separated from the launch area and stabilized their formation, cutting across the Crimean Peninsula toward Kerch Port. But as Ukrainian coastal units lowered their weapons, another Russian defensive system began to operate at Sevastopol port. The Murman BN electronic warfare complex expanded its antenna network and began scanning the entire shortwave spectrum from 3 to 30 megahertz. The system did not need to see the Mura V5 on radar. It only needed to detect unusual data streams crossing the Black Sea. Passive receivers continuously searched for control signals, command communications, and transmissions that could lead back to a Ukrainian operations center. Once a suspicious signal was identified, Murman BN transmitted high-power electromagnetic energy into that frequency area, trying to drown the real data beneath a dense layer of radio interference. On the screen at the command center near Odessa, the camera image from the Mura V5 suddenly flickered. One frame froze. The next frame broke into square blocks. Then the image jumped forward by almost half a second. The signal was still there, but it was beginning to collapse. This was the vital weakness of the Mura V5. The vessel could operate nearly 500 miles from its operator, but every command to change course, increase speed, or lock onto a target still depended on electro-optical imagery transmitted live across the Black Sea. The signal did not travel directly to the vessel. Commands from the command bunker were passed through a coastal transmission station, then to an airborne relay unmanned aerial vehicle before being sent down to the Mura V5. Images from the camera on the vessel also returned to Odessa through that same communication chain. This system overcame the limits of the radio horizon, but at the same time, it created multiple weak points. If one link was jammed, the image would slow down. If 2 links weakened, the operator could lose track of the vessel. If the entire transmission chain was cut, the Mura V5 would continue moving without receiving new commands. To counter this threat, it integrated automatic target tracking and mission corridor recovery capability. When the signal dropped below the safe threshold, the onboard computer immediately took over. The inertial navigation system used gyroscopes and acceleration sensors to maintain the heading. The optical camera continued scanning the sea surface, identifying the coastline targets and features already stored in memory. If radio interference pushed the vessel away from its route, the artificial intelligence would compare the real image with the digital map, calculate the error, and automatically correct the rudder. The Mura V5 did not need to know every coordinate with perfect accuracy. It only needed to determine whether it was drifting left or right, then point its bow back toward Kerch. Above, the 7 FP-1 unmanned aerial vehicles also switched to backup mode. Each unmanned aerial vehicle activated its artificial intelligence integrated inertial navigation system. The onboard computer continuously compared ground imagery with the digitized terrain map loaded before the mission. Coastlines, river mouths, roads, residential areas, and major terrain features became reference points, allowing them to correct their own trajectory errors. When satellite signals or control links weakened, 6 aircraft quickly stabilized. Their flight path stopped oscillating and continued stretching east straight toward Kerchport. But the 7th was not so fortunate. Its inertial system still maintained basic altitude and heading, but the video link could not recover. The operator's screen showed only distorted frames mixed with dark gaps. Without imagery, the unmanned aerial vehicle could not confirm the safe corridor or execute the final approach phase with the required precision. The mission computer assessed that the error had exceeded the allowable limit. Instead of continuing to fly blind toward Crimea, the FP-1 turned back and shifted onto a return-to-base trajectory, using the inertial data it had stored. Below, the Mura V5 continued moving east. The camera on the vessel began to recover its image. At first, there was only a blurred horizon. Then the sea surface became clearer, and the navigation data began appearing again on the screen. The artificial intelligence system had kept the vessel inside the corridor long enough for the relay network to find a more stable transmission path. The communication chain between the control bunker, the ground transmission station, the relay unmanned aerial vehicle, and the unmanned surface vessel had not been broken. The control link had been restored. The formation had stabilized, and ahead of them, the Crimean Peninsula was beginning to appear on the horizon. The unusual signals over the Black Sea were quickly forwarded to the Black Sea Fleet Command Post in Sevastopol, and almost immediately, the Russians began deploying the next interception measure. At the narrow approaches around Sevastopol port, base protection units used a biological surveillance system, military dolphins. These dolphins were trained and fitted with small sonar devices to detect semi-submerged unmanned surface vessels that coastal radar could struggle to distinguish from waves and floating debris. When an abnormal signal appeared outside the harbor and ants, the warning was immediately transmitted back to the command center. Vasily Baikov-class patrol ships and the warships protecting Sevastopol were ordered to maneuver for interception. On deck, heavy machine gun mounts turned toward the sea surface while AK-630 rapid-fire cannon systems began scanning for low targets rushing in. Only a few minutes later, small wakes appeared on the western horizon. The guns immediately opened fire. Hundreds of rounds cut across the sea surface, creating repeated columns of water in front of the Mura V5 formation. The vessels spread their formation wider, changed direction, and continued driving into the fire zone. But this diversionary encounter was only the first phase of a multi-axis tactical maneuver designed to test the limits of Sevastopol's harbor defense. As the Russian guns opened fire off Sevastopol, one burst pierced the composite hull of the lead vessel and struck the explosive compartment. 700 pounds of explosive detonated directly on the sea surface, tearing the vessel into thousands of fragments and creating a cloud of water, smoke, and metal debris across the area. The explosion did not only destroy the Mura V5, it also created a chaotic interference zone in front of Russian sensors. Red-hot hull fragments fell into the water, columns of steam obscured electro-optical cameras, and dozens of small reflection points appeared on radar at the same time. But that was exactly what Ukraine needed. What Russian forces did not yet know was that 3 Mura V5s in this formation were not carrying main warheads at all. Their payload compartments had been modified into launch platforms for small first-person view unmanned aerial vehicles. When the formation entered the correct area, the covers on the vessel hulls opened. At the same time, 12 first-person view unmanned aerial vehicles shot into the air. Each vessel launched 4 unmanned aerial vehicles, creating a new group of targets just above the sea surface. The first-person view unmanned aerial vehicles carried transmitters and electronic warfare payloads designed to amplify their signals, causing Russian reconnaissance systems to assess them as the opening phase of a larger attack. On the screens at Sevastopol, the situation immediately became chaotic. 3 Mura V5s continued accelerating toward the Black Sea Fleet formation. Above them, 12 first-person view unmanned aerial vehicles split in multiple directions, constantly changing altitude and forcing the defensive systems to track a large number of targets at the same time. Machine guns on the patrol ships opened fire first. Then came the AK-630 systems. 6 rotating cannon barrels fired at extremely high speed, throwing a dense wall of rounds across the sea surface. Within a short time, all 3 Mura V5 vessels and all 12 first-person view unmanned aerial vehicles were destroyed. Not a single vehicle broke through the defensive line, but they had just drawn the exact response Ukraine wanted, while Russian radar, anti-aircraft guns, and patrol ships focused on the Battle of Sevastopol. 4 other Mura V5s had already separated from the formation earlier. They accelerated away from the engagement area, using the gunfire, smoke, and hundreds of chaotic signals behind them to conceal their journey toward the Kerch Strait. Above the Crimean Peninsula, the remaining 6 FP-1 unmanned aerial vehicles were also entering the engagement zone of Buk M3 systems. Russian radar quickly locked on the and transferred target data to the launchers. The 9M-311M missiles left their launch rails, accelerated through the night, and climbed along different interception trajectories. In less than 1 minute, 4 FP-1 unmanned aerial vehicles disappeared from the formation. Only 2 survived. They immediately dropped altitude, tightened their spacing, and continued flying toward Kerch using inertial navigation. Behind them, the Buk M3 was preparing for the next launch. Ahead lay the dense network of radar, anti-aircraft guns, and missiles protecting the bridge, the railway station, and the military facilities around the strait. But beneath the sea horizon, 4 Mura V5 vessels were also moving toward the same area. Now, the 2 remaining attack axes were converging on Kerch, forming a pincer from the air and from the sea. And this time, Russian defensive systems would have to decide which threat had to be destroyed first. But the closer they came to Kerch, the more the situation deteriorated in the most dangerous way possible. Off the eastern coast of Crimea, the sea began to open wider and become more exposed. There was no longer smoke from the diversionary battle at Sevastopol, nor a dense layer of target clutter to shield the formation. The 4 Mura V5 vessels now had to race across open water, where any Russian electro-optical sensor could see them from a long distance. And this time, the threat did not come from a patrol ship. It came from the air. Russia had reactivated one of its most effective tools for hunting unmanned surface vessels in the Black Sea, the Kamov Ka-29 helicopter, known by its NATO reporting name Helix. For Russian commanders, this choice made perfect sense. The Mura V5s were small, low, very fast, and capable of constantly changing direction across the sea surface. A large warship would struggle to maneuver quickly enough to chase them, especially in a battle where only a few seconds of delay could allow a port or pier to be attacked. But a helicopter was different. The Ka-29 could climb high to observe, drop low to pursue, and pour direct fire onto targets that had almost nowhere to hide on the open water. On the Ukrainian operator's screen, the first target appeared as a bright dot moving quickly from the north. A few seconds later, that dot separated into a clearer shape. 2 coaxial rotors, a short fuselage, and a nose angled slightly downward. The Ka-29 was descending. The helicopter did not attack immediately. It held an observation altitude for a few moments, confirmed the direction of movement of the Mura V5 formation, then began diving into the approach line. The Russian pilot selected the lead target. From the side-mounted launcher, a salvo of 80mm S-8 rockets left the tubes and dropped toward the sea surface. These unguided rockets did not need to strike the vessel hull directly to cause damage. If they landed close enough, the shockwave on the water could tear open the composite hull or disrupt the control system. The first salvo landed wide, but the second did not. A chain of water columns rose around the lead Mura V5, and in the next instant, the vessel disappeared inside a low fireball. The blast tore the vehicle apart, destroying the first vessel in the group. With the first Mura V5 destroyed, the remaining 3 immediately split directions, but the K-29 stayed close. As the distance shortened, the Russian pilots switched to a weapon more suitable for a small maneuvering target. The 4-barrel GSHG 7.62 machine gun began to roar, with a rate of fire reaching up to 6,000 rounds per minute. It created a dense net of fire sweeping across the sea surface, forcing the vessels to keep changing direction in order to survive. Moments later, the 30mm 2A42 automatic cannon on the left side of the aircraft fuselage joined in. This was the kind of firepower that the composite hull of the Mura V5 could not withstand for long. 30mm rounds carried enough kinetic energy to pierce the bow section, destroy the control compartment, or detonate the explosive charge inside the hull with only a few accurate hits. The second Mura V5 tried to brake sharply right, but a burst of fire swept into the center of the hull. Half a second later, the entire vessel exploded inside the dense stream of fire, leaving a patch of flame spreading across the water. The second vessel had been taken out of the fight, but the chase was draining the Ka-29's firepower very quickly. The rocket pods were almost empty, and the 30mm cannon had fired most of its ready combat load. Without enough ammunition to finish the remaining targets, the Ka-29 was forced to pull its nose up, leave the pursuit axis, and return to base to reload. That was exactly the moment Ukraine had been waiting for. The two surviving Mura V5s immediately accelerated, their low bows pitching forward close to the water as the engines drove them straight toward Kerch. At that exact moment, the attack axis from the air also appeared as the two FP-1 unmanned aerial vehicles that survived the Buk M3 interception arrived. They dropped altitude, approached the Kerch area from two different directions, and tightened the encirclement. From the sky came two loitering attack drones. From the sea came two Mura V5s racing forward at high speed. When the Ukrainian formation entered the Kerch Strait, Russia's final defense faced them directly. At both Crimean bridgeheads, Russia had placed Pincer S-1 systems on metal towers 105 feet above the water. From this position, the 1RS-2 radar could cover most of the approach corridor. The 1RS-2 radar immediately switched to tracking mode, but the targets had already moved too close. The commander ordered the system to switch to guns. The two 30mm 2A38M cannons lowered toward the sea surface, firing at a combined rate of 5,000 rounds per minute to build a wall of bullets in front of the Mura formation. The two Muras split to both sides, changing direction again and again, but the Pincer guns adjusted and laid another layer of fire ahead of them. The Ukrainian control team understood that if the Pincer continued firing, the two vessels would be pinned down until reinforcements arrived. One vehicle had to open the way. The FP-1 on the left immediately changed course, lifted its nose, locked directly onto the Pincer tower, and dived at 200 feet per second. The 2A38M cannons raised their barrels upward, but the FP-1 punched through the final fire zone and slammed into the upper section of the tower, destroying the radar cluster and gun mount. With the Pincer fire silenced, the corridor was open. The two Mura raced through the water in front of the Crimean bridge, while the final FP-1 continued dropping altitude toward the main target. Directly in front of Kerchport, a Project 10 Thor 410 Svetlac-class patrol boat was blocking the entrance. The ship's captain ordered all close-range weapons to open fire. The 30mm 6-barrel AK-630 cannon turned toward the Mura on the left, while the 14.5mm heavy machine gun swept into the remaining vessel. The Mura on the left broke sharply, but a second burst struck the center of the hull, detonating the 700-pound explosive charge inside and sending a shockwave into the side of the patrol boat. Only one vessel remained. At that exact moment, the final FP-1 began its dive. A Russian combat team launched an Igla missile and sailors fired AK-74 rifles. But at nearly 200 feet per second and a distance of only a few hundred feet, the defending crew could not stop the attack. The final sprint began. The surviving Mura V5 pushed its engine to full power, accelerated to 40 nautical miles per hour, and drove straight into the starboard side of the Svetlac patrol boat. At nearly 70 feet per second, the 500 feet distance left only 7 seconds to react. The Mura V5 slammed into the hull at the waterline, detonating its 700-pound charge, tearing open the starboard side, and forcing the vessel into a heavy list as seawater flooded the lower compartments. Less than 1 second later, the FP-1 crashed straight down onto the deck directly above the ammunition and combat system area. The warhead detonated through the upper metal plates, destroying power lines, control cables, and piping between the gun mount and combat compartment. Fire immediately spread into the ready-use ammunition area, triggering secondary explosions that erupted more than 100 feet into the air. In only a few seconds, the Svetlac patrol boat had been struck from 2 directions, turning Russia's final defensive layer at the entrance to Kerch Port into a burning mass of steel in the Black Sea. What do you think decided the success of this attack? The Pincer tactic, the sacrifice of the FP-1, or the final breakthrough of the Mura V5? Leave your thoughts below, and let us keep moving toward the earliest possible peace for Ukraine.